The morning Eunice Ashe decided to take the bus downtown, she almost didn't go at all. Her hip had been complaining since Tuesday, the way it always did when the weather shifted, and the sky outside her kitchen window had the low, dishwater look of a morning that couldn't decide whether to rain or just threaten it. She stood at her counter in her housedress and slippers, stirring her coffee with the slow, unhurried patience of a woman who had learned decades ago that most of the things people rushed toward ended up tasting better when you waited. The lemon pound cake was already wrapped in wax paper beside her, the same recipe she had been making since before her daughter was born. The one Monique still asked for by name every time she came home, which was never quite as often as either of them would have liked. That was why Eunice decided to go. Not because her daughter was famous, or because the conference Monique was headlining was the kind that made the business papers. Eunice didn't read the business papers. She went because she had made the cake, and because Monique had been in the city since Sunday without once setting foot in the house on Lorimer Street where she'd grown up, and because a mother's job, as Eunice understood it, never really ended just because the child had moved into a world that barely resembled the one she'd raised her in. She dressed slowly, the way she always did since her hip started arguing with her. Navy slacks, her good cream blouse, the small gold earrings her late husband Wallace had given her for their 32nd anniversary. She did not think of herself as a woman who dressed up for occasions. She thought of herself as a woman who respected wherever she was going enough to arrive looking like herself. There was a difference, and it had taken her 31 years of teaching middle school English to fully understand it. Wallace had always teased her for that. He'd say she was the only person he'd ever known who made getting dressed into a philosophy. She'd say he was the only person she'd ever known who needed 30 minutes to find his keys every single morning and still somehow made it to work on time. He had died of a heart attack at 67, 5 years earlier, and there were still mornings when she set 2 coffee mugs on the counter before remembering. She packed the pound cake into her canvas tote alongside her umbrella, and a ball of burgundy yarn. She was partway through knitting into a scarf for the homeless shelter on Warren Avenue. She had been donating scarves to that shelter since 1987. She had missed exactly 1 monthly drop-off in all those years, the week Wallace died, and had sent 2 scarves the following month to make up for it. The bus ride downtown took 35 minutes. Eunice sat near the front, her tote in her lap. A young mother across the aisle was struggling to keep a toddler from climbing out of his stroller, and Eunice spent 3 stops making faces at the boy until he was laughing too hard to go anywhere. The bus driver, a broad man with a gray beard who'd been on this route as long as Eunice could remember, caught her eye in the rearview mirror and smiled. "Big plans today, Ms. Eunice?" he asked as she rose to get off at the corner of 5th and Halstead. "Just bringing my daughter something," she said. "She forgets to eat when she's working." He laughed, and she stepped down onto the sidewalk, into the long shadow of the Grand Meridian. The hotel had been a landmark in the city since the 1940s, rebuilt twice and renovated once before its current owners had transformed it into the kind of place where the lobby smelled of white tea and quiet money, and the chandeliers alone were worth more than the block Eunice had grown up on. She had walked past it hundreds of times over the decades without ever stepping inside. Now she pushed through the brass revolving door with the unhurried confidence of a woman who had spent 31 years walking into rooms full of 12-year-olds who thought they owned them and had always, eventually, been right. The lobby was grand in the particular way of places designed to make you feel small without quite saying so. Marble floors the color of old cream, a staircase that curved upward like a question mark, and the low curated hum of people who believed very deeply in the importance of their own appointments. A cluster of guests in resort wear stood near the concierge desk. A man in a charcoal blazer spoke quietly into his phone near the elevator bank. 2 women in matching conference lanyards moved past Eunice toward the ballroom corridor without looking at her. She didn't pay much attention to any of it. She walked to the front desk, set her tote gently on the counter, and smiled at the young man standing behind it. His name tag, said Tyler. He was 27 years old and had the look of someone recently promoted who was still working out what to do with his face in the meantime. Good morning, Eunice said. I'd like to leave something for my daughter. She's a guest here, room 1412. Tyler looked at her for a moment that lasted exactly 1 beat too long. What name is the reservation under? He asked. Ashe, Monique Ashe. He typed, looked at the screen. His expression shifted in a way Eunice recognized. Not disbelief exactly, but the particular recalibration of someone who had already made a decision and was now being forced to revisit it without wanting to. I'll need to verify with the guest before accepting any packages, he said. She's currently listed as Do Not Disturb. That's all right, Eunice said. I'll wait. She found a chair near the window, a low, deep, cushioned thing that took some negotiating given her hip, and settled in with her tote on the cushion beside her. She pulled out her knitting. She had been working on the burgundy scarf for 2 weeks, the longest of the batch, because the shelter's director had mentioned they needed longer ones this winter, for the men sleeping near the overpass. She had been at it for 4 rows when she noticed a wallet near the elevator bank, clearly fallen from someone's coat pocket. She picked it up, walked it to the nearest bellman, and was back in her chair in under 2 minutes. She did not see Darren Cole watching her from across the lobby. Darren was 41 years old, director of security at the Grand Meridian for going on 6 years, a man who had spent most of his career confusing authority with intelligence and had never once noticed the difference. He had clocked Eunice the moment she came through the revolving door. The canvas tote, the unhurried pace, the house dress, and had made a decision before she reached the front desk. By the time she settled into the chair with her knitting needles, the decision had hardened into certainty. He simply waited for the moment that felt sufficiently official before acting on it. He crossed the lobby in the deliberate stride of a man who believed his uniform made him correct, and stopped in front of her chair. Ma'am, his voice carried, can I ask what brings you to the hotel today? Eunice looked up from her knitting. I'm waiting for a guest to become available, she said. I'm dropping something off for my daughter. And who is your daughter? Monique Ashe, room 1412. He didn't write it down, didn't reach for a radio to verify. I'm going to need you to wait outside, he said. This seating area is for hotel guests and registered visitors. I am a registered visitor, Eunice said calmly. My daughter is a guest. I spoke with the young man at the desk. Tyler told you she's unavailable. He said she's listed as Do Not Disturb. That's a different thing. She kept her voice even and her knitting moving. She had been navigating unreasonable men since before this one was born, and she had learned long ago that raising her voice never once made them listen faster. I'm not in anyone's way. I'll wait right here until she can be reached. Something in Darren's face tightened, the expression of a man who has confused the word no with a personal injury. Ma'am, I'm not going to ask again. Then don't, Eunice said, and went back to her knitting. The lobby, which had been maintaining its polished hum of activity, went a degree or two quieter. The man in the charcoal blazer lowered his phone. One of the resort-wear guests glanced over. A young woman in a white blazer who had been reading near the window put down her book and reached almost unconsciously for her phone. Darren reached forward and closed his hand around Eunice's elbow. It was not a gentle touch. It was the grip of a man who had already made up his mind before his hand moved. A deliberate, physical statement dressed as procedure. Eunice felt the pressure immediately, the way it pulled against the joint that had been troubling her all week, and she made a small sound, barely a gasp, barely a breath, but the lobby heard it. Her canvas tote slid from the cushion. The pound cake rolled out in its wax paper wrapping and came to rest on the marble floor. The knitting needles struck the tile with a bright clatter. The ball of burgundy yarn unraveled slowly across the pale marble like something bleeding out. Eunice steadied herself with her free hand on the arm of the chair, refusing to fall. She was 71 years old, and she had not once in her life fallen in front of a man who wanted to see her fall. "You take your hand off me," she said, quietly, without a single tremor. Darren did not. The young woman in the white blazer was already on her feet. Phone raised. The man in the charcoal blazer took 3 quick steps toward them. A couple near the staircase stood frozen, the woman's hand pressed over her mouth. A bellman near the entrance turned around and made no effort to pretend he was doing anything else. Tyler, behind the front desk, had gone the color of the marble floor. He did nothing. "I have lived in this city for 71 years, Eunice said, and her voice was steady now, the way a classroom goes steady after a teacher decides it will. "I have never been arrested, never been asked to leave anywhere, never given a single person a reason to put their hands on me." She looked directly at Darren, and what was in her eyes was not fear and it was not anger. It was something older and more unbearable than either. The clear-eyed recognition of a woman who has seen this particular moment more times than she should have had to. "Whatever you think you know about me from looking at me, you are wrong. You have always been wrong, and somewhere in yourself, I believe you already know that." Darren's grip loosened almost involuntarily, but he did not step back. "I'm calling police," he said. "You go right ahead," Eunice said. The young woman in the white blazer looked up from her phone screen. "I've been recording this since he walked over." She did not look at Darren when she said it. She looked at Eunice. "And I already sent it to someone." She had sent it to Jade, Monique Ashe's executive assistant, whose contact information she'd found by searching the name Eunice had mentioned to Tyler. She had sent it 6 minutes earlier, and Jade, who had been managing logistics for Monique's keynote presentation in the Grand Meridian's own conference ballroom 4 floors below, had not waited a single second. Monique Ashe had been standing at the center of a stage, in front of 3,000 people, when the message arrived on the tablet at the podium. "Your mother is in the hotel lobby. There's a situation. Come now." She had been mid-sentence, a point about the infrastructure gap in the tech industry, a statistic she had spent 2 weeks shaping into something a room full of executives might actually absorb. And she stopped, not faded out, not pivoted, not handed things off. She put her notes face down on the podium and said to the room, "I need to step away for a moment. Someone will be right back up." She left the stage at a pace that looked like calm and was not. Monique was 44 years old. She had grown up on Lorimer Street in a 2-bedroom house, where money was always 3 weeks ahead of itself. Her father had driven a delivery truck until a back injury ended that when she was 9. Her mother had kept them afloat on a teacher's salary and an unshakable refusal to let poverty determine what her daughter believed was possible. Monique had put herself through college on 3 scholarships and a weekend job cleaning office buildings. She had started her first company at 28 in a spare bedroom with a second-hand laptop and a credit card that was already maxed by the time she made her first hire. Forbes currently valued her at $1.4 billion, a number that still struck her as fundamentally absurd every time she saw it in print. None of that was in her mind as she moved through the service corridor to the lobby. The only thing in her mind was her mother. She came through the door and went still the moment she saw Eunice. Her mother was standing beside the overturned chair, upright, composed, in the way she always was. But her elbow was reddened where it had been gripped, and the pound cake was on the floor. And Darren Cole was 2 feet away from her, with the expression of a man who has lost control of a situation and not yet admitted it to himself. Monique walked to her mother first. She always would. She crouched beside the pound cake and checked the wax paper wrapping before she said anything. Then she stood and looked at her mother's face and touched the reddened place on her arm with 3 careful fingers. "Mama, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Eunice said. "Don't make a big thing out of this." Monique took 1 breath, long and slow and deliberate, and then she turned. She did not raise her voice. She never needed to. The quality of attention she commanded in a room had nothing to do with volume. It was something she had built over 20 years, one decision at a time, and it had a weight to it that people registered before they understood why. "Which one of you put your hands on my mother?" she said. Darren opened his mouth. Monique held up one finger, just one, and said, "Don't." She reached into her jacket and took out her phone. She pressed two buttons, and the call connected before the phone reached her ear. On the other end was a man named Raymond Galt, who held 32% of the hotel group that owned the Grand Meridian and 11 other properties across 6 cities. He and Monique had served on the same foundation board for 4 years. He picked up on the second ring. "Monique, what's going on?" "I'm standing in the lobby of your Grand Meridian," she said. "Your security director just put his hands on my 71-year-old mother and knocked her belongings across the floor." The silence on the line was brief and absolute. "I'm calling Graham right now," Raymond said. "Don't move." The next few minutes had the quality of a tide going out. Graham Alcott, the hotel's general manager, 53, silver-haired, 2 decades in luxury hospitality, came through the back office door already pale. He had received 2 phone calls in 90 seconds. He needed neither of them to tell him what he was walking into. He looked at Darren, then at Eunice, then at the pound cake Monique was still holding, then at the phone, still in Monique's hand. "Mrs. Ashe," he said, and the way he said it made Tyler flinch visibly at the desk. "I am profoundly sorry. Please let me." "Graham," Darren started. "I was following standard protocol for—" "Darren." Graham's voice did not rise. "You're done here." Badge to Tyler. "Personal items from the security office, today." The lobby went comprehensively silent. The man in the charcoal blazer had forgotten his phone call entirely. The resort-wear couple stood motionless at the foot of the staircase. The young woman in the white blazer had her phone angled slightly upward, still capturing. A bellman near the entrance had turned fully around and was making no effort to hide it. Darren's face moved through several things in quick succession. Disbelief, then anger, then the specific dawning horror of a man who has finally calculated the real cost of a decision made 20 minutes ago. He looked at Monique. He looked at Eunice. He looked back at Graham. "This is ridiculous," he said. "She was loitering. I followed." "You were wrong," Graham said. "And you used force against a guest's family member. This conversation is over." By 6 o'clock that evening, the video was everywhere. The young woman in the white blazer, a travel writer from Philadelphia in town for the conference, had posted it with a caption that said only, "This happened at the Grand Meridian today." The woman being grabbed is 71 years old. She came to bring her daughter a piece of homemade cake. Within 3 hours, it had been viewed over 1 million times. By the time local news stations were setting up outside the hotel's brass revolving door, it had crossed 2 million and was still climbing. The hotel group issued a statement before sundown. It confirmed that the director of security had been terminated immediately, that the front desk supervisor had been suspended pending a full internal review, and that the company was committed to a transparent investigation. The statement also mentioned, in language clearly drafted by someone acutely aware of what the morning had cost them, that the hotel deeply valued its relationship with Monique Ashe and her organization and profoundly regretted the incident involving her mother. Monique gave one statement to the reporters gathered on the sidewalk. She had changed out of her conference blazer. She stood in the evening light without notes, the way she always did when she meant something. "My mother spent 31 years in a public school classroom, giving everything she had to other people's children," she said. "She came downtown today to bring me something she baked herself. That is the entirety of what she did. What happened to her today happens to Black women in this country every single day. In lobbies, in stores, in waiting rooms and airports. Most of those women don't have daughters standing nearby. That is the problem worth talking about." She didn't answer any follow-up questions. She went back inside to sit with her mother. A doctor at an urgent care clinic confirmed that Eunice's arm showed bruising consistent with forceful gripping and that her hip had not been re-injured. She was given an ice pack and a prescription for inflammation and was home on Lorimer Street before 9 o'clock. An attorney named Cheryl Dorman arrived the following morning with a leather portfolio and a voice like organized calm. She laid out the legal options across the kitchen table. Civil action, the near certainty of a swift public settlement, given the video evidence, the overwhelming strength of what Eunice's own composure had added to the record. Eunice listened to everything. She ate a slice of the pound cake. It had survived intact, and set her coffee cup down and looked at Cheryl Dorman with the expression of a woman who has been thinking something through since before you arrived. "I'm not interested in a settlement," she said. Cheryl nodded slowly. "What are you interested in?" Eunice folded her hands on the table. "That hotel has been in this city for 80 years, she said. People from neighborhoods like mine have walked past it their whole lives without once feeling like they could walk in. I want them to create a community liaison position, someone from neighborhoods like this one, whose job is to make sure that every single person who comes through that lobby is treated like they belong there." She paused. "Funded for at least 5 years, not as charity, as policy." Cheryl wrote that down. Across the table, Monique watched her mother with an expression she couldn't quite name, something between devastation and the most specific kind of pride. The hotel group agreed to every condition within a week. The community liaison program was announced publicly, quietly framed as a voluntary initiative rather than a settlement requirement. Anyone watching closely enough understood. Most people didn't need to. The first person hired for the position was a woman from the Waverly neighborhood who had been working double shifts at a grocery store, while finishing a hospitality management degree at the community college 2 nights a week. She started the following month, and on her first day, she held the front door open for an elderly woman with a canvas tote and said, without being asked, "Welcome. Is there anything I can help you find?" Monique was invited to speak at a national hospitality industry conference 3 months later about equity, about access, about what dignity looks like in practice versus policy. She declined the invitation. Then she called Eunice and asked if she would be willing to go instead. Eunice went. She stood at a podium in a hotel ballroom not unlike the one she had been turned away from, in front of 200 executives who had flown in from 11 states, and she spoke for 12 minutes without a single note. She talked about what it feels like to be 71 years old in a city you have loved your whole life, and to walk into a room and to know, with the kind of certainty that settles in your bones before a single word is spoken, that the person across from you has already decided who you are. She talked about her students, about the ones who grew up to be nurses and engineers and teachers themselves, and about the ones who had been turned away from rooms they had every right to enter, and about how those two facts were connected in ways that didn't always get said out loud in rooms like this one. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Not the conference room quiet of people waiting for the next slide, but the kind of stillness that comes after something true. On a Thursday evening 6 weeks after everything had happened, Monique drove back to Lorimer Street and sat in the kitchen with her mother until after 10. They ate slices of a new pound cake. Eunice had made a fresh one, and talked about nothing that had to do with hotels or news cycles or legal agreements. They talked about Wallace and how he used to put hot sauce on everything, including scrambled eggs, and maintain, with complete sincerity, that it improved all of them. They talked about the woman down the street who had just had her 4th grandchild. They talked about whether the Bradford pear in the backyard was going to survive another winter. At some point, Monique looked at her mother over her coffee cup and said, "You know, you could have just told them who I was the moment you walked in. Saved yourself the whole thing." Eunice tilted her head and considered that for a moment with the same expression she had once used to let middle schoolers realize, on their own, what they'd gotten wrong. "Baby," she said finally, "I shouldn't have needed to." Monique set her cup down. Outside, the Bradford pair's last leaves were letting go in the dark, drifting down onto a street that had known Eunice Ashe for 50 years. A street that had watched her leave for work at dawn, and come home at dusk, and wave at neighbors, and shovel sidewalks, and sit on the front steps, reading in the summer evenings. A street that held the entire quiet record of a life, built patiently and without fanfare, around the belief that decency was not something you earned by proving who you were, but something every person was owed from the very first moment, simply by virtue of being there. Neither woman spoke again for a while. There was no need. Some truths are complete the moment they land. The kitchen was warm, the cake was good, and the evening settled around them in the particular way of endings that were always going to be exactly this. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady and whole and already true.